going to talk about revival of Speedway, 1970s. This is a famous brother team, not so famous, but the dad was involved. So you had two brothers and a dad. You'll never guess who it was. They weren't the most famous Speedway riders in history, but they were part of the early day revival. And that was the Moon family. Do you remember? And then one of his boys, I think it was his oldest boy, I'm not sure, was Larry Moon. And Larry Moon happened to be the better Speedway rider of the whole family, because Larry was competing with all the top dogs in Division 1, and Larry was a pretty solid rider. I think he won a couple of handicap main events, and that was hard to do in those days. And Larry Moon was a really good rider. He wasn't a star rider, but he was mixing it up with all the top riders in the 70s. So that tells you you're a pretty good rider if you can kind of compete with all those stars of the 70s. And he was good. And I never know what happened to Larry after the Speedway days, but Larry was a very talented rider, considering he was racing against all those superstars. And Larry was the only Moon member that I know of that didn't referee after they got out of Speedway. And I don't know what happened to Larry. If anyone knows whatever happened to Larry Moon, let me know. But he just was mixed in with all those great riders. And somebody once said somebody has to take second place to all these superstars in the 70s. And Larry Moon, I'm sure, had his share of second place finishes and worse. But he had also a few wins also. So that was really great with Larry. But he was a good rider. I remember him. And he was a nice guy. I got a couple of his autographs when I was a little kid. But Larry Moon was really a good rider. But we don't know what ever happened to Larry Moon. And I have no idea. But I don't know much about what happened to Larry, because he's not on social media. And I never heard about him. He was one, like I say, he's one of those good riders that was just not really promoted that much. And people will remember him, but they won't remember him as a very top rider. But that was cool. You had the Moon family. That was a family affair in Speedway. You had all three riders, Papa and two sons, racing. And then Papa and one of the sons was referee, Irwin and Phil. And you had Larry competing. And he was, like I say, a solid rider, better than the other two. And it was just cool. If you remember the Moon brothers, they weren't really considered the Moon brothers, but they were, you know, part of history. They're part of Speedway in the 1970s. And during the 70s, I think they stopped racing and they moved on. I don't know much about their life after Speedway, but I do remember the Moons, Phil, Irwin, and Larry. And Larry was kind of quiet, that I remember, but they were good riders, part of the early day history. They helped make Speedway what Speedway was back in the days of Costa Mesa at the revival. But that's the Moon family, and they were good people, good riders, never were superstars, but they were definitely a part of the revival of modern day Speedway, and a part of Speedway history in the 70s, in the early days at Costa Mesa Speedway and at the other tracks.